You know, we're always told that in a competitive world, it's dog eat dog, every person for themselves. But what if I told you the single most powerful winning strategy wasn't about crushing your opponent, but about cooperating with them? It sounds crazy, but game theory has a really surprising answer, and it all kicked off with a simple tournament.
So let's get right into it. Our story doesn't start with some dusty philosophical debate. Nope, it starts with a straight-up competition. A tournament designed to find the one single best strategy for winning at this game of life.
So, let me ask you, imagine you had to design a computer program to play a game against a bunch of others, over and over again. Your only goal is to get the highest score. What would you tell your program to do? Would you make it aggressive and ruthless? Or maybe forgiving? Or totally unpredictable? Well, this was the exact question at the heart of a now famous experiment.
Okay, so picture this. It's the late 1970s, and a political scientist named Robert Axelrod decides to try something pretty cool. He sends out an invitation to a bunch of experts, economists, psychologists, mathematicians, you name it, to take part in a very unique kind of tournament. And the challenge he laid out was simple, but man, was it profound.
The game they'd be playing was the prisoner's dilemma, that classic setup where being selfish seems like the smart move, but can end up making everyone worse off. But Axelrod added a huge twist. This wasn't a one-and-done game. Each program was going to face off against every single other program 200 times in a row.
So after all these expert strategies battled it out, the results were just stunning. The winner wasn't some ridiculously complex galaxy brain algorithm. Not even close. It was one of the simplest strategies submitted, a little 4-line program called tit for tat. And its rules? So simple. First, cooperate on the first move. Second, for every move after that, just copy what your opponent did to you last round. That's it. Seriously. So, how in the world did this incredibly simple, almost naive strategy completely crush the competition? Well, the secret is all about one single, powerful concept. See, the success of tit for tat wasn't really about being nice. It's not about altruism. It's about something far more practical. The simple fact that this isn't a one-time encounter. The players know they're going to interact with each other again and again and again.
And this gets us to the core idea of what's called a repeated game. It just means that your actions today don't happen in a vacuum. They send a message. You're building a reputation, and that reputation directly impacts how you're going to be treated tomorrow.
Axelrod came up with this brilliant phrase for it, the shadow of the future. When that future is long, it casts a shadow on the present, and it makes the long-term benefits of playing nice suddenly seem way more appealing than the short-term temptation to betray someone for a quick win. Okay, so this whole idea of future consequences isn't just a neat little thought experiment. It builds into one of the most fundamental concepts in all of game theory. Because if cooperation really is the most rational choice, well, there's got to be a way to enforce the deal. For cooperation to actually be stable, you need a credible threat. If someone defects, if they betray you, you have to be able to make them regret it. So what's the ultimate punishment? What's the absolute worst you can do to an opponent to keep them in line? In game theory, they call this the min-max payoff. Just think of it as the rock-bottom, worst-case scenario. It's the lowest possible score your opponent can force you to get, no matter how hard you try to do something else. It's your guaranteed floor for failure.
And this is where the logic gets really powerful. If you want to convince someone to cooperate with you long-term, the deal you offer them has to be better than that min-max payoff. It just makes sense, right? Why would they ever cooperate with you if they know they can get a better outcome on their own, even if it's just their guaranteed minimum?
And that brings us to this elegant, powerful idea called the folk theorem. Fun little fact. It's called the folk theorem because this idea was so common among game theorists in the 1950s, long before anyone published a formal proof, that it was just considered folklore. And it basically says this: in a repeated game, as long as players are patient, almost any cooperative outcome can be a stable result. Cooperation isn't a miracle, it's a mathematically sound strategy.
So how do you make it happen? Well, one famous way is called the grim trigger strategy. It's simple. You start by cooperating, but the very second the other player defects, you pull the trigger. You punish them forever by locking them into their worst possible outcome. It's incredibly harsh, yeah, but it makes that one-time gain from betraying you look like a catastrophically bad idea.
Now, this all sounds great in a computer tournament, but does this kind of strategic thinking actually happen out in the real world? Well, let's take a look at a fantastic case from the animal kingdom.
I mean,
It's one thing for us to program these ideas into computers, but do animals, running mostly on instinct, actually operate with these same principles? Does reputation and reciprocity matter to them?
Well, allow me to introduce the three-spine stickleback. These little fish have a really risky job. They have to swim up to potential predators to gather information, and they often do it in pairs. You can think of it like this. Moving forward together is cooperating. Holding back while your buddy goes ahead, that's defecting.
So a biologist named Manfred Milinski set up this brilliant experiment. He put a stickleback in a tank with a predator behind some glass. Then, on one side, he put a mirror that showed the fish a partner who seemed to match its every move, a cooperator. On the other side, he angled a mirror to show the partner lagging behind, a defector. The results? The real fish was much, much braver and got way closer to the predator, but only when it had a cooperating partner by its side. It behaved exactly like tit for tat would predict.
So, tit for tat wins the tournament. We see it in nature with fish. It really seems like we found the golden rule of cooperation. But, like with most things in science, the story gets a little more complicated.
In fact, even Axelrod's own later work showed that tit for tat's victory wasn't as bulletproof as it seemed. It's a really strong strategy for sure, but it has a critical weakness, especially when things get messy and complex.
And this weakness opened the door for a new contender, a strategy called Pavlov, or, as it's often called, win, stay, lose, shift. It's more sophisticated. Instead of just blindly copying the other guy, Pavlov looks at its own success. If the last round went well, it repeats what it did. If the last round went badly, it switches things up.
This makes Pavlov much more robust. It's better at exploiting opponents that are too forgiving, but, crucially, it can break out of those death spirals of mutual revenge that tit for tat can get stuck in after just one misunderstanding. It's more adaptable. In fact, Milinski himself later suggested his sticklebacks might have been playing Pavlov all along.
So we're left with this fascinating puzzle. The logic of cooperation is mathematically sound, and we can actually see it in nature. The rules seem clear: make the future matter, be willing to punish betrayal, but also be quick to forgive. So if the blueprint is so obvious, why does it so often feel completely out of reach in our own world? It makes you wonder, maybe the hardest part isn't knowing the rules of the game, but having the patience and the foresight to actually play the long game.